There's a specific kind of panic that some people experience multiple times a day. It doesn't announce itself with obvious chaos or dramatic crisis. It lives in the moment when you check the time and realise you should have left 10 minutes ago. In the rushed apologies you're already composing in your head while you're still getting dressed. In the familiar, sinking feeling that once again, despite your best intentions, you're going to be late. Maybe you know someone who lives in this constant state of running behind. Maybe it's you. That person who genuinely means to be on time, who sets alarms and makes plans and feels terrible about making people wait, but who somehow still arrives 15 minutes late to almost everything, carrying apologies and excuses that are starting to sound hollow, even to themselves. Most people think chronic lateness is about disrespect or laziness, or not caring enough about other people's time. But psychology tells a far more complicated story. For most people who are always late, the pattern isn't about not caring. It's about a fundamental miscalculation between their sense of how time works and how time actually works, combined with underlying patterns of optimism, anxiety, or executive function challenges that make accurate time estimation nearly impossible. The lateness doesn't come from malice or disregard. It comes from a genuinely distorted relationship with time that feels completely different from the inside than it looks from the outside. The chronic apologising isn't performance. It's real remorse about a pattern they seem unable to fix, despite desperately wanting to. Here's the part that makes punctual people deeply frustrated. People who are chronically late aren't trying to be late. They're trying to be on time almost every single time, and they genuinely believe they will be, until the moment it becomes clear they won't. They set intentions to leave early. They plan buffer time. They promise themselves this time will be different. This time they'll finally build in enough margin. This time they won't cut it so close. And every single time, something happens. The task they thought would take 5 minutes takes 15. The thing they were sure they could squeeze in before leaving turns out to be not squeezable. The route they drive regularly suddenly has traffic they didn't anticipate. The series of small decisions that seemed reasonable in the moment adds up to being late again, despite all the planning and all the genuine intention to be different this time. And what's fascinating is that the brain of someone who's chronically late processes time differently than the brain of someone who's chronically punctual. Research in time perception shows that some people have what's called temporal optimism, a consistent pattern of underestimating how long tasks will take. It's not conscious lying or willful ignorance. It's genuine misperception, where their internal sense of duration doesn't match actual elapsed time. When they think something will take 10 minutes, they truly believe it will, even though their history consistently shows it takes 20. This isn't poor planning in the conventional sense. This is a perceptual issue where their relationship to time is fundamentally miscalibrated in ways that don't correct, even with repeated experience of being wrong. This is why chronically late people often say something that sounds absurd to punctual people. I thought I had enough time, not as an excuse, but as a genuine description of their experience. The internal calculation told them they had enough time. That calculation was wrong, as it usually is, but it felt accurate in the moment. That miscalculation doesn't mean they don't care about being on time. It means their time perception system is feeding them unreliable data, and they keep trusting it despite evidence they shouldn't. Psychologists describe this as planning fallacy or time optimism bias, but those terms don't capture what it's like to live with a brain that consistently lies to you about how much time you have, and then makes you face the consequences of those lies over and over. The mind isn't trying to sabotage commitments by being late. It's operating on flawed time perception that creates genuine surprise when they check the clock and discover that somehow, impossibly, it's later than they thought, and they're behind again. And here's where the misunderstanding deepens, where judgment from punctual people becomes harshest. Being on time is supposed to be basic respect, right? That's what culture says. That if you care about people, if you value relationships, if you're a responsible, functional adult, you show up when you say you will. That lateness is a character issue, a statement about priorities, a form of disrespect that reveals your true feelings about the person you're making wait. But for people genuinely struggling with chronic lateness, the inability to be on time doesn't reflect how much they care. It reflects a disconnect between intention and execution that they haven't figured out how to bridge, despite years of trying and feeling ashamed about failing. Many chronically late people don't want to be late. That's almost never the goal. They want to be the person who arrives early, who has time to spare, who never makes anyone wait. They want to stop feeling the constant anxiety of running behind. They want to stop damaging relationships with a pattern they can't seem to fix. They want the relief of finally, consistently showing up when they're supposed to, without drama or stress or apologizing. They want people to stop being frustrated with them, and they want to stop being frustrated with themselves. And when none of that happens, despite genuine effort, despite trying every productivity hack and time management system and alarm configuration, something becomes devastatingly clear. The problem isn't lack of wanting. The problem is something deeper that wanting alone can't fix. At first, people struggling with chronic lateness try harder. Maybe I just need more discipline. Maybe I need to set earlier alarms. Maybe I need to build in more buffer time. Maybe I'm just not trying hard enough to be better at this. Then they try systems. Maybe I need a better calendar app. Maybe I need to schedule everything with travel time included. Maybe I need visual reminders or accountability partners or some organizational structure I haven't found yet. Then they try accepting the pattern while hating themselves for it. Maybe this is just who I am. Maybe I'll always be the late person, and I just need to warn people in advance so at least they're not surprised. And finally, after enough experiences of failing to change despite genuine effort, they land in this painful space of not knowing whether the problem is fixable or whether they're fundamentally broken in ways that make punctuality impossible. What's rarely discussed is how much shame accumulates around chronic lateness. Because being late isn't just a minor inconvenience. In many social and professional contexts, it's seen as a moral failing, as evidence that you don't respect other people, that you think your time is more valuable than theirs, that you're selfish or disorganized or fundamentally inconsiderate. And when you're someone who is late despite genuinely not wanting to be, despite feeling terrible about it every single time, you start internalizing those judgments. You start believing that maybe you are selfish, even though you don't feel selfish. That maybe you don't really care about people, even though you know you do. That maybe there's something fundamentally wrong with you that makes you incapable of this basic adult function that everyone else seems to manage without difficulty. Psychologically, this creates what researchers call chronic shame, or identity-based self-criticism. The lateness stops being just a behaviour and becomes evidence of who you are as a person. Not, I'm late, but I'm a late person. Not, I struggle with time management, but I'm inconsiderate and disrespectful. And that shift from behaviour to identity makes the pattern even harder to change, because now you're not just trying to modify a habit, you're trying to become a different kind of person while carrying the weight of believing you're fundamentally flawed. Because humans are wired to believe that repeated behaviour reveals character. From a young age, most people learn that what you do consistently is who you are. That if you're repeatedly late, despite saying you'll be on time, you must be lying about caring, or you must not be trying hard enough, or there must be something wrong with your values, or priorities, or basic functioning. So when someone is chronically late despite hating being late, their mind often asks cruel questions. Why can't I do this? Why is something that seems so simple for everyone else impossible for me? What's wrong with me that I keep failing at this basic requirement? Am I actually a bad person who doesn't care about others, and I just can't see it? And those questions carry devastating weight because they're asking about fundamental adequacy, about whether you're capable of being the kind of person who functions properly in society. This is where the internal experience becomes crushing. Because on one side, there's the genuine distress about being late, the real remorse, the actual desire to change. And on the other side, there's the accumulating evidence that despite all that desire and distress, the pattern persists, which suggests that maybe the problem is deeper than time management. Maybe it's something about you that's unfixable. Studies on chronic lateness show something important. It correlates with several underlying factors that have nothing to do with respect or consideration. ADHD and executive function, challenges that make time blindness and task switching difficult. Anxiety that creates procrastination around getting ready or leaving. Optimism, bias that consistently underestimates duration. Perfectionism that makes people try to finish one more thing before leaving. Difficulty with transitions that makes starting the process of leaving feel overwhelming. For people with these underlying patterns, being on time isn't just about setting an alarm earlier. It's about managing neurological or psychological patterns that affect time perception and task completion in fundamental ways. But here's the psychological truth that doesn't get enough attention. The advice punctual people give to late people almost never works because it's addressing the wrong problem. Just leave earlier doesn't help someone whose brain consistently tells them they have more time than they do. Just set more alarms doesn't help someone who hits snooze without fully waking. Just stop trying to do one more thing doesn't help someone whose brain doesn't register that starting a new task means they'll be late. The punctual person's experience of time management, where you check the clock, calculate backward from when you need to arrive, and leave with appropriate buffer. That entire process assumes time perception that accurately matches reality. For people with time blindness or executive function challenges, that foundational assumption doesn't hold. Their experience is more like this. They know they need to leave at 2. At 1:30, they think they have plenty of time, so they start a task. They get absorbed. They check the clock, and it's somehow 1:55, and they haven't even started getting ready. And now they're in panic mode, trying to do in 5 minutes what actually takes 20, and they leave late again, despite having known they needed to leave at 2. The knowledge didn't translate to behaviour because the intervening time disappeared in ways their brain didn't track. And being told to just pay better attention to time is like telling someone with poor eyesight to just see better. The mechanism that's supposed to be doing the tracking isn't functioning reliably. The final reckoning with chronic lateness often comes not after one embarrassing incident, but after accumulated damage to relationships and opportunities. After being told one too many times that your lateness makes people feel disrespected. After missing important meetings or disappointing people you care about. After realising that this pattern you can't seem to fix is costing you professionally and personally in ways that keep adding up. That realisation isn't motivating, it's devastating. Because it means accepting that something you've been trying to fix for years, maybe decades, might not be fixable through willpower or better systems or wanting it more. It might require accepting that you're genuinely impaired in this area and need to structure your life around that limitation rather than constantly fighting against it and failing. And grief around unfixable patterns changes how people approach not just time management, but their entire sense of competence. Research shows that chronic lateness creates secondary anxiety, where people start avoiding commitments entirely because the stress of trying to be on time and likely failing feels worse than just not making plans. the pattern becomes self-reinforcing. Being late creates shame. Shame creates avoidance. Avoidance reduces opportunities to practice being on time. And the cycle continues, with the person becoming more isolated and more convinced they're fundamentally broken. Another misunderstood aspect is this. People assume that if being late bothered the person, they'd change. That continued lateness proves they don't actually care that much. In reality, it often proves the opposite. They care so much that the repeated failure creates genuine suffering. They just haven't found a solution that works for their particular brain and situation. The very fact that they keep trying despite consistent failure shows how much they want to be different. Someone who genuinely didn't care, wouldn't feel the anxiety, wouldn't make the effort, wouldn't carry the shame. They'd just be late without emotion about it. The chronically late person who's distressed about being late is someone who cares deeply and is failing anyway, which is a completely different psychological situation than not caring. As children, many chronically late adults learned certain patterns. Maybe they grew up with parents who were always late and never learned what punctuality looks like practically. Maybe they developed ADHD symptoms that went unrecognized. Maybe they learned that rushing creates adrenaline that helps them focus, so being late became functionally useful, even though it's socially costly. As adults, they're living with the consequences of those early patterns, while trying to meet social expectations that assume everyone started with the same foundational skills around time management. And naming those origins doesn't fix the current problem. Understanding that your time blindness might stem from ADHD doesn't make you suddenly able to estimate duration accurately. Recognizing that you learned dysfunctional patterns in childhood doesn't automatically teach you functional ones. What was once adaptation or overlooked challenge becomes chronic adult struggle that affects everything. That recognition is powerful, but it doesn't resolve the practical problem of continuing to be late to things that matter. And that creates an impossible situation. You understand why you struggle, but understanding doesn't translate to capability. You want to change, but wanting hasn't been enough to create change. Neither option, accepting that you'll always be late or continuing to fail at being on time, feels survivable. Here's something rarely acknowledged. Chronically late, people often have specific strengths that correlate with their time blindness. They're often highly creative, able to think divergently, capable of intense focus when something captures their attention. The same brain that loses track of time when absorbed in a task is often the brain that can do deep work others can't. The same optimism that makes them underestimate how long things take also makes them willing to tackle ambitious projects. The same difficulty with transitions that makes leaving hard also sometimes means sustained engagement with complex problems. These aren't excuses for being late, they're context. The trait isn't purely deficit. It's difference that creates both costs and benefits, though the costs are more socially visible and penalised, while the benefits go unrecognised. And those capacities don't disappear when someone finally finds strategies that help with punctuality. Some people discover that radical honesty helps, telling people they'll likely be 15 minutes late, and then arriving in that window feels better than promising on time and arriving late. Some people restructure their entire lives around their lateness, choosing careers and relationships that don't penalise it as heavily. Some people finally get diagnosed with ADHD and find that medication or therapy creates time perception that was never accessible before. Some people just accept that they'll always struggle with this and build in so much buffer time that their time blindness is accounted for mathematically. Not fixed, compensated for. From a psychological standpoint, this is called adaptive compensation, or working with limitations rather than against them. The mind stops trying to become someone it's not and starts building systems that accommodate who it actually is. And interestingly, People who stop fighting their lateness and start planning around it often experience relief, even though the underlying issue hasn't changed. They're still not naturally punctual. They've just stopped expecting themselves to be and started building life structures that work despite that limitation. But there is one part of chronic lateness that remains painful, even when you've made peace with it: the judgment. Even when you've found strategies, even when you've built in buffer time, even when you're doing everything you can to manage a pattern that doesn't come naturally, people still interpret lateness as disrespect. The chronically late person who arrives 10 minutes late after enormous effort to not be 30 minutes late gets the same frustrated response as someone who didn't try. The struggle is invisible. The lateness is not. The psychology of people who are always late is not about disrespect. It's about the gap between intention and execution. The gap between how time feels internally and how it actually passes externally. The gap between wanting desperately to be different and not knowing how to become different despite years of trying. And perhaps the most important truth is this: most people who are chronically late are suffering about it. They're not cavalier or careless. They're ashamed, frustrated, confused about why something that seems simple for others remains impossible for them. They want to change. They just haven't found the key that unlocks that change. And that reality, however it manifests in missed meetings and strained relationships, deserves acknowledgement that goes beyond simple judgment. More complicated than it appears, more painful than observers assume, not chosen, not fixable through wanting alone, just a pattern that persists despite genuine effort to be different, leaving the late person perpetually running behind and perpetually apologising for a version of themselves they never intended to be.